Growing up in North Florida, sailing along the Gulf Coast, there was no concept you could do for a living in the sail training business or even the sailing business. That came when I was in college a little bit, getting involved in the sailing of racing. Eventually I ended up in the Navy. The alternative was getting drafted into the Army and going to Vietnam. So I went in the Navy for 2 or 3 years on board destroyers, which actually were built in BIW in Bath. That led into a couple of different boating jobs, one of which was a Swedish cruise ship for 8 months. And then another was a Spanish squid fishing trawler, my first transatlantic sailing vessel. As a navigator, ended up again in Florida on a research vessel as mate. And one day I found myself on board a brig named Unicorn for a cocktail reception. After the cocktail reception, I found myself volunteering on board as a crew member. 3 years later, I was the captain of it, but her mission became that of sea education. I had everything from high school to college students on board, sailing out of Tampa and Boston Aquarium, coming down East Maine in the summers. That boat eventually was sold. From then on, I started moving into interesting yachting experience, sailing back and forth across to the Mediterranean. Signed on board Spirit of Massachusetts when she was brand new, just built there in the Charlestown Navy Yard next to Constitution here in Boston. It kind of started off with that program that was developed in Unicorn, which is a very interactive program. The whole idea evolved over time, got better and better with Spirit and other vessels which came into the company that was running Spirit eventually, which was called Ocean Classroom Foundation. At one point we had Harvey Gamage and Westward along with Spirit, with the students and the crew, bringing them right into the life of the vessel. Many of those programs were accredited for high school or college credit. I think the real education happened when they were sailing up to 4 months, everywhere from Nova Scotia to Trinidad to Belize, all up and down the seaboard. We're going to teach your kid what it's like to crew on a boat like this, what it's like to be at sea, to experience this whole thing. Students worked the deck, stood the helm watches, did navigation, did the whole thing. To be cut off from all sources of communication, always would try to instill in the students this sense of independence, especially the high school students. A lot of them apply to become crew members, and sometimes working their way right up through the ranks. From deckhand, a few of them even take over and become captain eventually. Many went to Maine Maritime Academy, Massachusetts Maritime too. The student crew who were sailing these vessels had this very direct relationship between the vessel and themselves. That's the way I like to look at it. These vessels do represent a certain legacy in this sea educational mode. Irving Johnson and his Yankee would sail around the world with students on board. Romance was another one with Kimberly. He sailed Romance around the world several times too with students, many of whom became very stalwart sailors themselves. I'm a little bit notorious. I was known for bringing sea literature and poetry into the realm as it relates to the student experience. Nothing like reading some Masefield or Joseph Conrad when the students are experiencing that before the mast, literally. That was also part of our education program. Our crew was very involved interacting with the students. They were like mother hens to their watchmates, their student crew, but they also were responsible for bringing them into the ship. They were with their student crews every time the student was on deck. The crew was right there on the front lines in terms of bringing the student experience to fruition, teaching them all the lines and everything, to eventually stepping back, even if it was just a week-long trip, stepping back and let the students learn by actually doing. The overall goal of these programs was for the student to become aware and knowledgeable enough to actually take on the different aspects of running the ship. The crew would be the ones who would be nurturing these abilities in the students as they came along. And the crew sometimes had been former students themselves. Here I am standing in front of many shipmates out here in the audience and other folks who have helped me get in front of all these vessels that have come my way. I'm only a representative of a lot of other folks who are out there, so I am humbled. And I'm very grateful to the National Maritime Historical Society for granting me this award.